James Garner finally speaks up about James Arness. James Garner was born on April 7, 1938. As James Scott Bumger, Oklahoma City, Garner's childhood was very different from the opulence of Hollywood. He had a terrible and unstable childhood. When he was just 5 years old, his mother died, and his father had a hard time raising James and his brothers by himself. Garner later talked honestly about how hard it was to grow up with a stepmother who was emotionally and physically abusive at times. These early experiences influenced how he saw the world. They made him deeply empathetic toward others and gave him a lifelong dislike of brutality, arrogance, and unfairness. Garner left home when he was a teenager and worked a lot of different jobs, such as a dishwasher, gas station attendant, and carpet layer. He went at the University of Oklahoma for a short time but didn't finish. Joining the U.S. Army and fighting in the Korean War changed his life forever. He wasn't a classic war hero, but he did get hurt twice and got the Purple Heart. This changed him in a big way. Garner didn't often make war sound romantic. Instead, he had a calm pleasure in having done his duty and a sober respect for those who served. Garner moved to Los Angeles after his time in the military and studied acting there even though he didn't want to. He never saw acting as a big deal, unlike many other people who wanted to be actors. Acting to get was a job for him, and he took it seriously but not too seriously. This down-to-earth attitude would eventually set him apart in a profession where ego is typically the driving force. The television western Maverick in 1957 was the turning point in his career. Garner changed the way people thought about western heroes when he played Brett Maverick. Instead of playing a tough gunslinger, he played a smart, funny, and ethically flexible gambler who used his wits more than his fists. The part showed off Garner's inherent charm and ability to make people laugh without trying, which immediately made him a household star. More importantly, Maverick let him add intelligence and sarcasm to a genre that had been full of strict tropes before. Even though the program was a hit, Garner got into a big fight with Warner Brothers over his contract. They wanted to push him too hard under stringent studio rules. Garner sued the studio and won, which was a brave and never-before-seen maneuver at the time. This set a key legal precedent that helped break the old studio system's hold. This one act made him known as a man who would stand up for what was right, not only for himself but for other actors as well. Garner's move to film was smooth. He was in a lot of movies in the 1960s and 1970 seconds that showed how versatile he was. He was great in comedies like The Thrill of It All, war dramas like The Great Escape, and romantic movies like Move Over Darling. He gave a great performance in the Americanization of Emily in 1964, where he played a reluctant war hero with sharp intelligence and moral complexity. It was one of the best anti-war performances of the time. In 1968, Garner made a spectacular return to TV with The Rockford Files. He played Jim Rockford, a private detective who was having a hard time, and made one of the most famous TV characters of all time. Rockford was sarcastic, defiant, weak, and always easy to relate to. The show included funny parts, mysterious parts, and character-driven stories. Garner won an Emmy for his portrayal. The series was very physically demanding, and Garner often did his own stunts, which led to long-term injuries and agony. But his dedication never changed. Garner also has strong morals. He fought for civil rights, was strongly against racism, and took part in the March 1963 on Washington with people like Martin Luther King Jr. He never asked for acclaim for these things. They only showed how much he believed in fairness and equality. Garner kept giving great performances in his final years. He was nominated for an Academy Award for his portrayal in Murphy's Romance 1985, which showed that his delicate, mature manner really connected with audiences. He then became popular with younger generations through movies like Space Cowboys and The Notebook, where his modest emotional depth made a lasting impression. As his health got worse because of heart problems and injuries he had gotten over the years from doing hard work, Garner slowly stopped acting. But his legacy just got stronger. People liked him not only because of his brilliance, but also because he lived his life with honesty, humor, and kindness. James Garner's private life was full of a love story that was as unusual as it was long-lasting. It was a peaceful contrast to the glitz and drama of Hollywood. He married Lois Josephine Fleckman Clark only once. She would be a big part of his life for almost 60 years. Their affair started in the most casual way at a party in 1956, but what happened next was so intense that it felt like a movie. Garner fell in love right away. On August 17, 1956, barely 16 days after they met, they got married, a quick judgment made not with thought but with assurance. Garner later remembered those early days with a smile and a lot of love. "We had dinner every night for 14 nights. I was just absolutely nuts about her," he remarked, showing how excited he was to have found the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. At that time, money was hard to come by, and he was far from the success and security he would later have. But love for Garner was more important than anything else. He joked that I spent $77 on our honeymoon, which almost shattered me. This showed that he came from humble beginnings and yet knows how to laugh at himself. Garner looked at marriage with a realistic attitude that was formed by his own life experiences. Even if he was famous, one of his most famous quotes compared marriage to military service. "Getting married is like joining the army. A lot of people complain, but you'd be shocked at how many people sign up again." It was a clever line, but it also showed how deeply he cared and how loyal he was. Garner did not make marriage seem easy. He understood it as something that needed patience, endurance, and the ability to keep picking the same person over and over again. Lois Clark brought her own past into the marriage. She had a 9-year-old daughter from a previous marriage who was recovering from polio, a dangerous and life-changing disease in the 1950s. When they were married, Garner welcomed both Lois and her child without reluctance, taking on the roles of husband and father with the same quiet sense of duty that characterized much of his personal life. The couple had their own daughter, Greta, who they called She, 2 years later. She was born on January 4, 1958. Being a father was one of Garner's greatest joys, and he stayed very loyal to his family even as his career took off. Lois was Jewish, and Garner respected her faith. This was another sign of the understanding and respect that kept their relationship strong. There were problems in their marriage. Not for long, but what made them different was their mutual resolve to get through those storms. They were apart for 2 years over the years. The first one lasted 3 months in 1970, while the second one started in 1979, but even during these hard times, they were never really apart. They got back together in September 1981 and decided to get married again and carry on together. James Garner died in 2014, and he and Lois were still married. Their romance had lasted over 58 years. In a profession known for short love affairs and broken marriages, their marriage was a quiet example of love based on loyalty, humor, forgiveness, and hard work. Garner had a lot of famous roles and public praise in his life, but his biggest triumph might have been the one he had off camera. A lasting relationship that showed that real love doesn't need showy things to last. It only needs devotion and passion. James Garner rarely talked about James Arness in public for decades. Even though both men were huge stars on classic American TV, Garner, the laid-back, sharp-witted star of Maverick and the Rockford Files, and Arness, the stoic face of Gunsmoke, were two very different types of men in Hollywood's golden age. But behind the scenes, their careers crossed paths in ways that led to comparisons, competitiveness, and underlying conflicts. Garner didn't talk about Arness and what their time together meant to him until later in life, long after he had become famous. Garner said that at first he saw Arness as more of an institution that couldn't be touched than as a competitor. Jim Arness was more than just an actor. Garner once said, he was Gunsmoke. He owned that show, not CBS. Garner said that Arness had a huge job to do. He was the anchor of a show that set the standard for westerns on TV for 20 years. Garner didn't like how strict the studios were, but he silently respected Arness's strength. Garner added, I knew how hard it was to keep coming back year after year to achieve that without losing yourself. That requires a strength that most people don't see. At the same time, Garner was honest about how far apart they were. The two guys didn't see each other socially very much. Unlike many Hollywood friendships that grew on studio lots or at industry events, Garner said we weren't friends, different styles, different groups, and different ways of doing business. Garner's career was built on humor, rebellion, and charisma that made him seem like an everyman. Arness, on the other hand, was all about authority, restraint, and serene moral conviction. Jim Arness had that presence, Garner added. He didn't have to say anything when he stepped into a room. People stood up straight. Garner also talked about the analogies that others made to him without saying anything. People sometimes called him the anti-Western hero since he was the star of Maverick. He was a fun antithesis to the serious lawmen who were the main characters in the genre. "I was the guy who smiled and cheated at cards," Garner stated with his usual sense of humor. Jim Arness was the man who made the law. Garner didn't feel angry. Instead, he felt relieved by the difference. "I didn't want to be him," he said, "and I don't think he wanted to be me either." Later on, Garner came to understand Arness' personal problems better, especially the emotional wounds he had from World War II. "He'd seen things I'd never seen," Garner stated quietly. "That changes a man." Garner thought that Arness channeled that gravity into his performances, which gave Marshal Matt Dillon a depth that people naturally trusted. Garner remarked that people had faith in him. They trusted him. "That's not acting. That's what you are." Garner was honest when asked why he stayed quiet for so long. "Hollywood loves to make people fight each other." He remarked, "I didn't want to give in to that nonsense," but over time, he became less unwilling. Garner thought it was finally time to talk to both men with honesty and respect, since they were both getting older. He added, "We were from the same generation. We helped make something that isn't there anymore." In the end, Garner's thoughts showed not competition, but recognition. For 20 years, Jim Arness was the star of that show. People trusted him, whether they liked him or not, Garner added. "And trust is the most important thing in our company." James Garner didn't gossip or complain when he broke his silence. Instead, he gave a meaningful tribute to a fellow actor who, in his own way, changed American television forever. The last chapter of James Garner's life came to an end softly, but it had a big effect on Hollywood and other places. On July 19, 2014, at 3:30 a.m., police and emergency responders were sent to his Brentwood residence in Los Angeles after a plea for help. When they got there, they found that the beloved actor, who had defined decades of film and television with his easy charm, dry humor, and unmistakable presence, had died quietly at the age of 86. Fans who had grown up with him and co-workers who respected him as a star and a good, principled man in a business that isn't always kind were shocked when they heard he had died. He died of a heart attack caused by coronary artery disease, which had been a problem for him in his later years. Garner's health has been weak for a while, especially following the stroke he had in 2008, which was a turning point in his physical health. He faced these problems with his usual stoicism and grace, but those close to him understood that his strength was fading. Still, the loss felt unexpected because James Garner, with his warm smile and long-lasting movie legacy,